I'm Rebecca Collins, 46 years old, and the day I signed the deed to my oceanfront villa, I thought I'd finally earned my peace. Decades of double shifts, missed holidays, and quiet endurance had brought me here to a wide stretch of California coastline, where the waves touched the base of the cliffs and the air smelled like salt and freedom. I remember standing by the window barefoot among half-open boxes, believing that silence could finally be mine. But just as I set down the pen and exhaled, the phone in my pocket began to ring. That single call, the one that should have been a moment of congratulations, would instead remind me that peace doesn't come easy when family thinks they own your life. Before I go any further, tell me where you're listening from in the comments, and don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to protect your peace from the people closest to you. I grew up in a modest two-story house in Oregon, the kind where you could hear every footstep on the staircase and every word spoken in the kitchen. My parents, Robert and Elaine, raised my sister Melissa and me on old-fashioned values: work hard, be kind, and respect what belongs to others. They believed effort was a form of love, and they taught us that nothing came without earning it. I took those lessons to heart. I studied engineering, built my career from the ground up, and learned to live within my means. Melissa, on the other hand, learned something different: how to let others catch her when she fell. When we were young, Melissa's charm could fill a room. She was magnetic, always talking her way out of chores or sweet-talking her way into favors. Our parents laughed it off back then, saying that's just how little sisters are. But that habit of hers, the assumption that someone else would clean up her mess, followed her into adulthood. I saw it more clearly each year, but I convinced myself it wasn't my place to judge. After all, family helps family. That's what Mom used to say. In my 20s, while I was taking side jobs and saving every spare dollar, Melissa was chasing luxuries she couldn't afford: designer handbags, expensive dinners, and weekend getaways she paid for on credit. Whenever the bills caught up with her, my phone would ring. The first few times I helped without question. Just until my next paycheck, she'd promise, and I believed her. But the promises faded, replaced with guilt trips and teary phone calls that always ended with me transferring money I couldn't really spare. Years turned into decades, and the pattern only deepened. I paid her rent when she lost another apartment. I covered tuition for her daughter because you're better with money, Becky. I even co-signed a loan she later defaulted on, nearly ruining my credit. Each time she thanked me, hugged me, and went right back to living beyond her means. And each time, I told myself I was doing the right thing. Love means sacrifice. That's what I believed. Until the day I bought my villa, the one thing that was purely mine. The place was everything I'd imagined. In my loneliest nights, wide windows overlooking the Pacific, pale oak floors that caught the afternoon light, and the sound of the sea rolling steady and endless below the cliffs. It wasn't just a house. It was proof that every night I'd worked late, every plan I'd put off, every time I'd chosen responsibility over comfort, it had all led somewhere. For the first time, I didn't feel guilty for having more than Melissa. I felt proud. That pride lasted exactly 1 week. I remember the call as if it were still echoing through the room. I had been unpacking my kitchenware when my phone buzzed across the counter. Melissa didn't bother with a hello. Her voice was brisk, commanding the way she used to sound when we were teenagers, and she'd tell me to clean her side of the room. "We're on our way," she said. "There'll be 15 of us. Get the beds ready, make sure there are enough towels. We'll be there in 40 minutes. For a long second, I thought I'd misheard. 15 people. 3 weeks. She didn't ask if I was free or if it was convenient. She announced it like it was an obligation I'd already agreed to. I tried to speak, but she had already hung up. The phone felt heavy in my hand, her words still ringing in my ears. My villa, my hard-earned quiet, was about to become her vacation home. I stood there in the middle of my half-unpacked living room, the sea wind pushing through the open doors, rustling the moving boxes. It would have been easy to panic or to give in like I always did, but something inside me felt still almost calm. Maybe it was exhaustion, maybe clarity. I just knew I couldn't keep living as the person who always said yes. I had spent years letting my sister's chaos seep into my peace, believing it was my duty to fix what she broke. Now, with the Pacific stretched wide before me and the faint cries of gulls echoing across the cliffs, I felt the quiet truth settle in. This house wasn't built for guilt or debt. It was built for freedom. And for once, I was ready to protect it. Outside, the sky was fading to pink, the waves rolling in slow rhythm. I glanced at my watch. If Melissa kept her word, she'd be here in less than 40 minutes. 15 people, all expecting open doors and open arms. I brushed the dust from my hands, looked around the room, and whispered to myself, "Not this time." What I didn't realize then was that the moment those engines rumbled up my driveway, it wouldn't just be my peace on the line, it would be every boundary I'd ever failed to draw. The engines came first, low rumbling echoing off the cliffs. Then came laughter, a mix of high-pitched excitement and shouting spilling through the open balcony doors. I looked outside and saw 5 cars lined up along my driveway, their tires crunching over the gravel like an approaching parade. At the front of the convoy, a black SUV idled with the confidence of ownership. I didn't need to see who was behind the wheel. I already knew. Doors opened and people began climbing out, men in sunglasses carrying coolers, women with beach bags slung over their shoulders, children racing toward my walkway with the kind of energy that had no boundaries. They treated my home as if it were a hotel they'd already paid for. My pulse quickened. Melissa stepped out last, her hair perfectly styled, a pair of gold-framed sunglasses catching the sun. She spread her arms wide as if she were the one who owned the ocean behind me. "Becky," she called out, her voice warm and falsely cheerful. "Look at this place. You really outdid yourself." I stayed behind the glass door, my hand hovering over the knob. Part of me still hoped there'd been some mistake, that she'd laugh and tell me she was joking. But when the first wave of her guests started up the steps, dragging rolling suitcases behind them, I realized the truth. She wasn't joking. They were here to stay. The knock came sharp and quick. "Come on, sis, open up." Melissa's voice carried the same impatience I'd heard my whole life. I opened the door, only an inch. "Melissa, I told you I'm not ready for company." She gave a breezy laugh, the kind that pretended everything was fine, then pushed the door open wider with one polished hand. The scent of her perfume, sweet, heavy, expensive, rushed in with her. Behind her came the others, streaming past me before I could stop them. My living room filled with noise, footsteps, laughter, the hiss of beer cans cracking open. Someone shouted, "This place is incredible!" Another voice answered, shotgun on the big bedroom upstairs. Within seconds, the home I'd dreamed of for years felt like it was dissolving around me. Melissa turned in the center of the foyer, arms wide, smiling as her friends explored. "Didn't I tell you?" she said. "My sister always knows how to live large." She said it as though my sister were a title that gave her permission to everything I owned. My throat tightened. I tried to speak over the noise. "Melissa, I need everyone to stop and listen for a moment. You can't just walk in without asking." My words were swallowed by chatter and the clatter of luggage wheels. Someone's wet footprint streaked across the marble. Another guest pulled open the fridge. I took a breath that barely filled my chest. Melissa's attention shifted toward the staircase, the one leading up to my master suite. "That must be the big one," she said casually, already moving. I stepped in front of her, blocking the first step. "That room's private." Her sunglasses slid down the bridge of her nose, revealing a flash of annoyance. "Becky, don't be selfish. You've got plenty of space. Let me at least have the one with the view." Behind her, a young woman with a sun hat whispered, "The light up there will be perfect for selfies." Another man laughed and popped open another beer. I clenched my hands at my sides. "No one goes upstairs," I said, my voice sharper than I'd intended. "This isn't a rental, Melissa. It's my home." She tilted her head, that same mocking smile she'd used all our lives, tugging at the corners of her mouth. "Relax, Becky. Family helps family. You've got 4 bedrooms. Surely one won't kill you." Before I could answer, she brushed past me and started up the stairs, her sandals clicking against the wood. My heart thudded in my ears. "Melissa, stop," I said, following close behind. "That room's off limits." She reached the double doors at the top and threw them open. The afternoon light poured in, washing over the bed, the balcony, the ocean beyond. She walked in like she was stepping onto a stage. "Oh, this is perfect," she said, turning in a slow circle. "I'll take this one. I'll need the view for my yoga videos." 2 women I didn't recognize rolled in their suitcases, squealing over the space. I stood in the doorway, gripping the frame until my fingers hurt. "You're not sleeping here," I said. "No one is." My voice trembled, but it carried. Melissa pulled off her sunglasses and turned toward me, her tone flat and cold. "You really think this house makes you better than me, don't you?" The accusation landed like a slap. "This isn't about being better," I said. "It's about respect." She laughed softly, shaking her head. "You always were dramatic. It's just a room." Behind her, her friends had started opening drawers, touching the things I hadn't even finished unpacking. One of them held up a silk blouse from my closet. "Cute. Can I borrow this?" That was the moment something inside me began to unravel. The noise, the chaos, the invasion of everything I'd worked for it all blurred together. "Get out," I said quietly. No one moved. "Get out of my room," I repeated louder this time. Melissa's smirk faltered. Her eyes flickered over my face, searching for the weakness she always counted on. "You're making a big mistake," she said, lowering her voice. "You'll regret treating family this way." Her words hit the same old nerve, the one she'd pulled 100 times before. But this time, something was different. I wasn't 23 and broke. I wasn't scared of being the bad guy. "You need to leave," I said, steadying my voice. "All of you." The room fell silent. A man sitting on the window ledge set down his beer. One of the women looked from Melissa to me, unsure what to do. Melissa stepped closer, her perfume sharp in the air. "You don't mean that," she whispered. "You never mean it." I met her gaze. "I do now." Her lips tightened. "What are you going to do, call the cops on your own sister?" she asked, a mocking laugh in her throat. I didn't answer. The question hung between us like a dare. For a long second, no one spoke. The waves outside kept rolling steady and uncaring. Then slowly I turned and walked out of the room. Behind me came a burst of nervous laughter, someone muttering that I'd get over it. Melissa's voice followed sharp and certain. "She won't do anything. She never does." But this time, she was wrong. Downstairs, the air felt thick with noise. My heart pounded as I walked into my study and closed the door behind me. The lock clicked, a small sound but solid. I leaned against the wood, hands shaking, listening to the muffled voices through the walls. My home, my sanctuary sounded like a crowded bar. The truth was heavy in my chest. I had spent a lifetime giving in, apologizing and pretending boundaries didn't matter. Now, surrounded by the chaos of my own making, I finally understood what my parents meant about respect. It wasn't just about manners. It was about dignity mine. I crossed to my desk and picked up my phone. The reflection of my face looked pale in the dark screen, but my eyes were steady. I scrolled to the keypad and hesitated. Through the door, I heard glass break, followed by laughter. That sound decided it for me. When the operator answered, my voice was calm. "There are people in my home who refuse to leave," I said. "About 15 of them. They forced their way in." Outside, the laughter had turned to argument. I watched the shadows move under the doorframe, my heart beating with a strange mix of fear and certainty. The operator's voice stayed level. "Officers are on the way, ma'am. Please remain in a safe place until they arrive." As I hung up, the room went quiet except for the ocean outside. My hands still trembled, but the fear had shifted into something else, resolve. For the first time in my life, I'd stopped being the person Melissa expected me to be. From the hallway, her voice came again, sharp and impatient. Becky opened the door. "Don't do this." But I didn't move. I watched the clock on my desk, the second hand sweeping steady as the tide. 15 minutes, the operator had said. 15 minutes, and my world would finally change. The sound of footsteps echoed faintly beyond the locked door. Someone laughed, followed by the thud of something heavy landing against the wall. My hands trembled as I stood in the quiet of my study, the phone still warm against my palm. The dispatcher's words replayed in my head. "Stay in a safe place, officers are on the way." I looked toward the windows where the afternoon light had softened to gold and listened to my sister's voice drifting faintly from the hall. Becky opened the door. Melissa called, her tone sweet and coaxing. "We'll talk like adults. No need to make this ugly." The sweetness barely masked the sharpness underneath. I stayed silent. The muffled sound of her sandals tapped against the hardwood, moving closer. "You're being ridiculous," she said, the cheer slipping from her voice. "This isn't you. You don't want to be alone." I sank onto the edge of the desk, my heart pounding hard enough that I could feel it in my throat. For years I'd bent to those same words. She knew the places where my armor was thinnest loneliness guilt, that old ache for approval. But the house around me was no longer a childhood battleground. This was my space, and for the first time, I wasn't giving it up. A crash came from the direction of the living room, followed by cheers and laughter. Glass shattered the sound, sharp and final. I closed my eyes and breathed in through my nose, out through my mouth, slow and even. It wasn't just noise anymore. It was a reminder of every small moment I'd been ignored, dismissed, or overruled by her. The more they laughed, the steadier I became. 15 minutes could stretch forever when you were counting them. The second hand on the clock moved painfully slow, circling toward rescue. I glanced at the framed photograph on my desk, Mom and Dad standing together on the porch of our old house, smiling as if the world were simpler than it had ever been. I wondered what they would say if they saw this. I already knew. My mother would tell me to stand tall. My father would remind me that respect isn't something you beg for, it's something you enforce. Becky Melissa's voice came again, closer now, louder. "You're making a fool of yourself. What are the cops even going to do? We're family. They'll tell you to calm down." A man's voice chimed in, low and mocking. "Yeah, she's calling the cops. Drama queen, move right." Laughter followed, careless and cruel. Something inside me hardened. I rose from the desk, standing near the door but not opening it. "You have 5 minutes," I whispered to no one in particular, though part of me hoped she could hear through the wood. My voice didn't shake anymore. The noise outside began to shift. I could make out hurried whispers, someone telling another to pack someone else, saying Melissa would smooth it over. The sound of the ocean filtered through an open window, rhythmic and calm. A strange contrast to the panic blooming on the other side of the door. Then came the sound I'd been waiting for, sirens faint at first, then sharper, cutting through the noise of the surf. Tires crunched against gravel out front. Voices rose in confusion. Melissa's tone broke into panic. "Stay calm, everyone. Don't do anything stupid. I'll handle this." I opened my eyes, the tension in my chest loosening just slightly. When the pounding came this time, it wasn't Melissa. "Police," a firm voice called. "Open up." From the foyer came hurried footsteps, suitcases dragging across the floor, and a door opening fast enough to rattle the hinges. Melissa's voice floated out, honeyed and breathless. "Officers, thank goodness you're here. My sister's having a bit of a breakdown. We just came for a visit, but she's overreacting." I unlocked my study door and stepped into the hall. The sight before me was chaos bags, half-packed strangers standing in clumps, the remains of spilled drinks glinting on the floor. At the front door stood 2 officers, a tall man with graying temples and calm eyes, and a younger woman beside him, her posture sharp and alert. The man spoke first. "Ma'am, are you the homeowner who made the call?" "Yes," I said, steady now. "Rebecca Collins, this is my property." I held out the folder I'd placed on the desk earlier, the deed visible inside. Melissa turned to the officers, smiling, as if we were all old friends. "She's just tired," she said lightly. "Moving's stressful, you know. We surprised her with a little family trip and she's taking it the wrong way." I met her eyes. "You forced your way in," I said quietly but clearly. "I asked you to leave more than once." The younger officer, whose name tag read Reed, glanced around the foyer. Her gaze caught the half-empty bottles on the counter, the footprints across the marble and the broken glass glittering near the dining table. Her lips pressed into a thin line. "Ma'am," she said to me, "do you want these individuals removed from your home?" "Yes," I said, "all of them." A hush fell over the room. Melissa's practiced smile began to tremble. "Becky," she said in a warning tone, "don't do this. Think about what you're saying." The older officer, Harris, according to his badge, turned toward her. "You and your guests have 15 minutes to collect your belongings and leave. If you're still here after that, it becomes trespassing." His voice left no room for argument. The reaction was immediate. People started muttering under their breath, shoving clothes into suitcases, shooting me dark looks as they moved toward the door. One man brushed past with a cooler clutched to his chest, muttering something I didn't catch. The children's laughter had gone quiet. Even Melissa's voice lost its command. She turned to me as the last of them filed out, her face pale under the porch light. "You'll regret this," she whispered, her words trembling between anger and disbelief. "You think this house will make you happy, but it won't. You'll end up all alone." I didn't answer. I watched her drag her suitcase down the path, her friends trailing behind like shadows. When the last door slammed shut on one of the cars, the engine sounds faded slowly into the distance. Inside, the silence settled heavy and unfamiliar. I stood in the middle of the foyer, surrounded by the faint scent of spilled beer and ocean salt. My body felt both weightless and exhausted. The officer spoke briefly, confirming that everyone had left, then handed me a card with their information. "If there's any further contact or trouble, Miss Collins." Officer Reed said gently, "Call us right away." "Thank you," I replied. My voice came out softer than I expected. They nodded, wished me a good evening, and left. The front door clicked shut behind them, the sound echoing through the house. For the first time all day, the only noise left was the ocean. I walked through each room, taking in the trail they'd left behind, empty cans, towels on the floor, a dented throw pillow where someone had sat laughing an hour earlier. In the kitchen, a half-empty bottle of wine stood uncorked on the counter, its surface sticky with fingerprints. I threw the bottle away, gathered what I could, and started to restore order piece by piece. By the time I reached the bedroom, the last of the sunlight had faded into dusk. The sheets were rumpled from where Melissa had tossed her suitcase. I smoothed them flat, then stood by the window watching the horizon darken. The house smelled faintly of dust and salt. It was quiet now, almost too quiet, but it belonged to me again. Every breath I took felt different, fuller somehow. When I walked back downstairs, my phone buzzed on the counter. Dozens of notifications filled the screen, calls, texts, and voicemails, all from the same number. I didn't open any of them. Instead, I placed the phone face down and stepped out onto the balcony. The waves rolled in slow, steady rhythm below. The sky was deep orange, fading into violet. I lifted my glass of water, my first calm drink in hours, and let the cool air touch my face. I knew Melissa wouldn't stop here. There would be phone calls, messages, maybe even another attempt to twist the story. But for the moment, she was gone. And the silence, the same silence I dreamed about when I bought this villa, was finally mine. Still, as the tide whispered against the rocks below, I knew the story wasn't finished. Families like ours never left wounds half-healed. Melissa's pride wouldn't let this go quietly, and something told me this night was only the beginning of what she'd do next. The morning after the police left, I woke to sunlight streaming through the curtains and the faint sound of waves breaking against the rocks below. The house was quiet again, but not entirely peaceful. The silence held the weight of everything that had happened the night before, the shouting, the broken glass, the faces of strangers crossing my threshold as if they belonged there. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the ocean until the reflection of the light blurred through unshed tears. I spent the first few hours cleaning what they'd left behind. Towels littered the hallway, empty cans sat in clusters on the patio. Someone had smeared sunscreen on one of the leather chairs in the living room. As I worked, I tried to remind myself that this was only damage that could be fixed. Floors could be scrubbed, walls could be repainted. But the deeper mess, the violation of trust and family, wasn't so easy to wash away. By noon, the villa finally looked like itself again. I opened the balcony doors, letting the wind carry out the last traces of perfume and spilled beer. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe without waiting for the next crisis to arrive. Still, peace didn't come easily. Every vibration from my phone made my shoulders tense. The screen lit up again and again with Melissa's name alternating between calls and messages. "You overreacted. You embarrassed me in front of my friends. Mom would be heartbroken to see how you treat family." I didn't answer. I couldn't. I turned the phone face down on the counter and poured myself a cup of coffee. The bitter heat steadied me, though the ache behind my eyes refused to fade. That night, I finally called Paula. Her voice came through the line, warm and steady, like a familiar blanket. "Beck, are you all right? You sound exhausted." "I'm fine," I said, though it wasn't true. "Melissa showed up yesterday, with 15 people. Paula let out a long breath. "You're kidding. I wish I were. They just walked in, like it was a hotel. She was quiet for a moment before saying, "You finally stood up to her, didn't you?" I stared at the waves outside the horizon, hazy in the fading light. The police had to come. I didn't know what else to do. That must have taken a lot out of you, she said softly. But Rebecca, you did the right thing. You've let her take advantage of you for years. It was bound to boil over. I keep thinking about what she said before she left, I admitted, that I'd end up alone in this house. Paula's voice didn't waver. There's a difference between being alone and being free. Her words stayed with me long after we hung up. I went to bed early, hoping sleep would come quickly, but instead my mind replayed everything, the look in Melissa's eyes when the officers escorted her out, the sharp twist of her mouth as she whispered her final threat. By morning, I knew the storm wasn't over. 3 days passed before the next wave hit. I stopped by the grocery store to restock and caught 2 women whispering near the produce aisle, glancing in my direction. One of them was a neighbor from down the road. When I greeted her, she smiled too brightly. "Rebecca, I heard there was some kind of scene at your place last week. Everything okay?" My throat tightened. "Just a misunderstanding," I said quickly, but the pity in her eyes told me Melissa's version had already started making rounds. That night, I opened my email and saw the proof. The subject line read, "Families shouldn't turn into enemies." It was from my aunt, someone I hadn't spoken to in months. The message was long and full of subtle judgment. Melissa had told everyone that I'd called the police over a minor argument and thrown her out without warning. My aunt urged me to apologize and make things right before it's too late. Each word landed like a stone in my chest. It didn't matter that it wasn't true. Melissa had always been skilled at shaping stories until she looked like the victim. For a moment, I hovered over the keyboard, tempted to defend myself, to lay out every fact, every receipt. But I didn't. I closed the laptop instead. The next morning, the phone rang again. I let it go to voicemail, then listened just long enough to hear Melissa's voice. "You're destroying this family," she said. "I hope you're happy, living in that big empty house knowing no one wants to visit you anymore." I pressed delete. Later that afternoon, I walked down to the beach below the cliffs. The tide had come in high, and the foam rolled across the sand in smooth white lines. The sky was pale, the air sharp with salt. For the first time in days, I let myself cry quietly the way you do when no one's watching. It wasn't just about Melissa. It was about years of letting guilt pass for love of giving without limits, because it was easier than being called cold. When I climbed back up to the house, the sun was low, and the light slanted gold through the windows. The mess was gone, the room spotless, but the emptiness still hummed in the walls. I poured a glass of water, turned on some soft jazz, and tried to find comfort in the normal things. That's when the knock came. It wasn't sharp like Melissa's had been. It was hesitant, spaced apart, almost polite. I opened the door to find Officer Reed standing there, her uniform neat, her expression calm. "Ms. Collins," she said with a nod. "I wanted to check in, make sure everything's been quiet since our last visit." "It has," I said. "At least here." She gave a small, knowing smile. "I've seen this kind of thing before. Sometimes people push back when they realize their control's gone." Her words caught me off guard, but I nodded. "She's been calling. A lot. If the calls continue or get threatening," she said, "save them. Don't engage. You've already established boundaries. Stick to them." I thanked her, and after she left, I stood for a long time at the doorway watching her patrol car disappear down the hill. The ocean stretched endlessly beyond calm again, as though nothing had ever disturbed it. That night I sat on the balcony wrapped in a blanket, listening to the sound of waves meeting the shore. The moon cast a thin silver path across the water, and the air carried the faint chill of early fall. My phone lay silent beside me, though I knew it wouldn't last. In the distance, I could almost hear my mother's voice, soft but steady, the way she used to sound when she told us to do what was right, not what was easy. And I realized that for all the noise Melissa had caused this silence, the kind you earn after finally standing your ground was worth everything. Still, a part of me couldn't shake the feeling that Melissa wasn't done. I could feel her anger from miles away, waiting for its next opportunity. The wind shifted, and somewhere below, a wave crashed harder against the rocks. The peace I'd fought for felt fragile, as if the next storm was already forming beyond the horizon. For nearly a week, the villa remained still, the kind of quiet that carries both peace and uncertainty. The days were long and bright, filled with the rhythm of ocean tides and the faint whistle of wind through the open windows. I tried to settle back into the life I dreamed of before Melissa arrived, coffee on the balcony, work calls from the study, simple dinners by the sea. Yet beneath that calm surface tension waited ready to stir at the smallest sound. It came back on a Thursday evening just as the sun dipped below the water. A car pulled into the driveway, its headlights sweeping across the stone path. My chest tightened until I saw it wasn't Melissa's black SUV, but a silver sedan I didn't recognize. A man stepped out, middle-aged, with an easy posture and a clipboard tucked under one arm. "Ms. Collins," he called from the gate. "I'm Mark Bennett. I live 2 houses down. I think we met once briefly when you moved in." I opened the gate cautiously. "Yes, of course. Sorry, it's been a week." He nodded kindly. "I heard what happened. Word travels fast around here. Just wanted to check if everything's all right. Sometimes family spats turn ugly and people need someone nearby." The concern in his voice was genuine, not prying. I thanked him, explaining that things had settled down. Before he left, he handed me a business card. "If she shows up again, call me first," he said. "My brother's on the homeowners board. We've had trespassing issues before." After he drove off, I stood for a moment under the porch light, turning the card in my hand. The neighborhood had seemed so distant when I first moved in, but now it felt like something solid, an anchor I hadn't realized I needed. That night, the messages started again. Melissa's number flashed across my screen over and over. This time I opened one. "You made me look insane in front of everyone. You could have just let us stay. Family doesn't treat family this way." Another followed seconds later. "You think you're so perfect, but everyone knows what you did." I deleted the first few, but the more she sent, the more I realized she wanted a reaction. The next morning I saved the texts and blocked her number. Still, her words lingered long after the phone went silent. 2 days later, I found a letter in my mailbox. No return address, just my name printed in Melissa's familiar handwriting. Inside, the pages were filled with half apologies and half accusations. She wrote that she'd been humiliated by the police visit, that I had turned my back on her, that Mom and Dad wouldn't recognize the person I'd become. At the bottom, in thick ink, she'd added one last line: "If you want peace, you know what you owe me." I stood at the counter for a long time, reading and rereading that line. Owe her after everything. My fingers tightened on the paper until the edges bent. I placed the letter in a drawer and called Paula. She answered on the first ring. "Beck, I was hoping you'd call. I got a letter," I said quietly. "She's not done." "Do you want me to come up this weekend?" she asked. "No, I'm okay. I don't understand how it got to this point. She's rewriting everything like I'm the one who wronged her." "That's what people like her do," Paula said gently. "They can't stand when someone stops playing their game." We talked for nearly an hour. When we hung up, the house felt lighter again. But that night, just after midnight, motion lights flicked on outside. My heart skipped as I moved toward the window. The driveway was empty except for a white envelope resting on the front step. Inside was another note, this one shorter. "You can't ignore me forever." I took a photo of the letter, slipped it into a plastic sleeve, and stored it with the others. The next morning, I called Officer Reed. When she arrived, she stood on the porch with the calm confidence of someone who'd seen worse. "You did the right thing, Ms. Collins," she said after reading the notes. "It's important to document everything. We'll file this under harassment in case it escalates." Her tone was professional, but her eyes softened. "I know this isn't easy. Standing up to family rarely is." After she left, I sat on the steps for a while, letting the sea breeze wash over me. I'd imagined this villa as an escape from pressure, not a new front line. But even as fear tried to creep in, something deeper took root: resolve. Melissa's tactics weren't new. She'd just found a louder way to use them. That evening, I closed my laptop after finishing a late design review for work. The house glowed softly under lamplight, and for a brief moment it felt like home again. I walked to the balcony, watching the horizon fade into indigo. The moonlight shimmered over the water, steady and unbothered by everything that had happened on shore. As I turned to go inside, my phone buzzed again, an unknown number this time. I hesitated, then answered. Becky Melissa's voice, soft and breathy, came through the line. I froze. "How did you get this number? I just want to talk," she said. "You blocked me everywhere. You can't just cut me out like this. I asked you to leave me alone." "I was hurt," she continued quickly. "I overreacted. But you know I didn't mean to upset you. You're my sister." Her voice trembled at the edges, but I could hear the calculation underneath. I'd heard it all my life, the shift from guilt to charm to demand. "It's late, Melissa," I said. "Don't call me again." "Wait," she snapped, her tone turning sharp. "You think this is over? You humiliated me. You called the cops on me. I won't forget that." The line went dead before I could answer. My hands shook as I lowered the phone. Outside, the waves crashed harder against the rocks, the sound deeper, darker. I called Officer Reed the next morning and gave her the new number. She assured me it had been added to the report. Afterward, I sat at my desk staring at my calendar. A part of me wanted to pack a bag and disappear for a few weeks, but another part stronger now refused to give her that victory. By afternoon, Mark stopped by again, bringing a spare motion camera he used for his driveway. "Might help you sleep better," he said as he handed it to me. "If anyone comes near the gate again, you'll know." We set it up together, testing the angle until it caught the whole stretch of the entryway. As the screen flickered to life, I felt something settle inside me. Not fear, but clarity. Melissa's shadow had stretched across my life for too long. This was where it ended. That night I sat by the window watching the small red light blink on the camera. The villa was quiet again, the ocean whispering its steady rhythm beyond the cliffs. For the first time since Melissa's visit, I didn't feel powerless. Still, as I turned out the lights and walked toward my bedroom, I couldn't shake the thought that she wasn't finished. People like Melissa didn't surrender. They waited for an opening, and somewhere deep down I sensed she was already planning her next move. By the time the weekend came, I had started sleeping with my phone on the nightstand screen down, but close enough to hear if it buzzed. Each night the camera's soft red light blinked at the end of the driveway, the only sign of life beyond the quiet hum of the ocean. I told myself things were finally settling, that Melissa's anger would eventually burn out the way it always had. But by Monday morning, that hope vanished. It started with an email from my employer. The subject line read, "Conduct Inquiry. Immediate attention required." My stomach dropped before I even opened it. Inside was a short message from Human Resources. A complaint had been filed against me, accusing me of misusing company funds to purchase personal property. My villa. I reread the message twice, the words blurring. The complaint had been submitted anonymously, but the phrasing was familiar, vague, dramatic, and heavy with self-righteousness. My hands trembled as I called Paula. She answered before the first ring finished. "What happened?" she asked. I told her about the email. Silence filled the line for a moment before she sighed. "She did this, didn't she?" "I don't know," I said, though I did. "It sounds like her." Paula didn't waste time. "Forward it to me. I'll talk to Tom in HR. You have receipts, proof of your savings, everything. They'll see right through it." Within an hour, she called back. "They're suspending the inquiry until they can verify the source," she said. "But Rebecca, it's pretty clear someone's trying to stir trouble." Her calm voice steadied me, but the ache behind my eyes lingered. Melissa hadn't just crossed a line. This time she'd gone for the one thing I'd built on my own. That night, as I walked the perimeter of the villa before bed, the air felt heavier charged. I double-checked the locks and looked out toward the driveway. The light from the camera flickered, then steadied again. I almost convinced myself it was nothing until I saw the faint glow of headlights parked just beyond the curve of the road. They lingered for several minutes before backing away slowly into the dark. I hardly slept. At dawn, I checked the footage from the motion camera. The headlights were there, grainy but clear enough to recognize the outline of Melissa's SUV. By mid-morning, Officer Reed was standing in my kitchen again. She studied the footage without saying much, then finally looked at me. "This confirms a pattern," she said. "She's escalating. We can file for a restraining order if you're ready." I hesitated. "Would that really stop her?" "It'll make it illegal for her to come near you or your home," she said. "Sometimes that's enough. Sometimes it's not, but it gives us leverage." I agreed. She filled out the initial paperwork explaining each step carefully. Watching her write, I felt an odd mix of fear and relief. For years I had been afraid to take formal action against my own sister. Now the idea brought a quiet strength I hadn't expected. That afternoon, I called my attorney to complete the filing. It felt strange even saying the words restraining order against a family member, but when the documents were signed, a weight I'd carried for decades began to ease. 2 days later, the peace broke again. I was in the middle of reviewing blueprints when my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw a courier holding a large envelope. "Delivery for Rebecca Collins," he said when I opened the door. The sender's name printed on the corner stopped me cold. Melissa Collins. Inside was a legal notice, a claim of emotional distress and defamation of character. She had filed a civil suit accusing me of public humiliation and false accusations that led to her being unfairly removed from private property. I sat at the dining table staring at the paperwork until my phone buzzed. It was Paula again. "You're not going to believe this," I said quietly. "She's suing me." There was a long pause before Paula said, "Then it's time you stop reacting and start protecting yourself." Her words settled like a stone in my chest. I called Mark that evening asking if he knew a good local attorney. He gave me a name, David Lawson, a seasoned lawyer who'd handled real estate disputes before. Within 24 hours, I was sitting across from him in a small office overlooking the harbor, explaining everything from Melissa's arrival to the police intervention. When I finished, David leaned back in his chair, folding his hands. "It's a bluff," he said simply, "but we'll respond properly. She's trying to wear you down. The best thing you can do is stay calm, stay documented, and let me handle the rest." I nodded, grateful but still uneasy. "She's not going to stop, is she?" He gave a faint smile. "People like that rarely do until someone forces them to." The next week passed in a blur of legal forms and phone calls. The restraining order was approved, and the notice of her lawsuit was met with a counterclaim for harassment and trespassing. Each document felt like a brick placed between us, a wall I'd needed for years, but never dared to build. Late one night, while reviewing a final set of papers, I received a text from an unknown number. "You think this will scare me? I'm not going anywhere." The message came without a name, but I didn't need one. I saved the screenshot and forwarded it to Officer Reed. Her reply came a few minutes later. "We'll add it to the report. She's pushing boundaries, don't engage." The next morning I woke early, the world outside still wrapped in mist. I made coffee, walked to the balcony, and watched the sky shift from gray to gold. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel trapped. Every decision I'd made, the call to the police, the filings, even the cameras, had drawn a clear line between my life and Melissa's chaos. As the sun climbed higher, I realized that what scared her most wasn't the law or the distance, it was the fact that I was no longer under her control. That realization didn't bring triumph. It brought peace. Still, peace had its own fragility. A few days later, Mark stopped by again, holding his phone. "Thought you should see this," he said, showing me a post on social media. It was Melissa smiling beside a caption that twisted the story again. She claimed her greedy sister had used money meant for family to buy a mansion. The comments underneath were full of sympathy and outrage. I scrolled through them slowly, my heartbeat steady. "It doesn't matter," I said, finally handing the phone back. "I've got the truth in writing." Mark nodded. "Good. Keep it that way. Don't let her drag you back into her storm." That night I sat alone on the balcony, the ocean glowing under the moonlight. The waves rose and broke in steady rhythm, like breathing. Somewhere out there, I knew Melissa was still trying to make noise, still chasing control she no longer had. But inside my home, everything was still. The fight wasn't over, but something had changed. I was no longer defending myself. I was standing my ground. And for the first time in my life, that felt like enough. The morning of the court hearing arrived gray and windless, the kind of stillness that settles over the coast before a storm. I woke early, long before the alarm, and watched the light crawl across the water from my bedroom window. The villa was silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the faint rhythm of waves below. Every sound seemed sharper that morning, the creak of the floorboards, the click of my coffee mug against the counter, even the quiet pull of my breath. David had told me the hearing would be quick. "She won't win," he'd said. "Her case has no merit. But you'll need to stand there calm and clear. Let her noise fade out on its own." I'd practiced what I'd say a dozen times, though I knew I wouldn't need to say much. The truth had weight even when spoken softly. At 9 o'clock, Mark pulled into my driveway. He offered to drive me into town so I wouldn't have to face the courthouse parking lot alone. I accepted, grateful for his quiet steadiness. We didn't talk much on the way, just the small things that fill silence without breaking it. The scent of salt carried through the open window as we drove along the cliffs, the ocean below a shifting shade of slate blue. The courthouse stood 2 blocks from the harbor, a square building with pale stone walls that caught the light like bone. David met us on the steps, his briefcase tucked under one arm. "Don't worry," he said with a small smile. "I've handled 100 like this. She'll try to make a scene, but we'll keep to the facts." Inside, the air was cool and dry. We waited on a wooden bench near the courtroom door. When Melissa arrived, the sound of her heels echoed down the hall before I even saw her. She looked composed, too composed, wearing a crisp navy dress and oversized sunglasses, as if she were stepping onto a stage instead of into a legal proceeding. Behind her trailed 2 of the same friends I remembered from the villa, whispering and smirking as they took seats behind her. She didn't look at me at first, but when she did, her smile was quick and sharp, the kind that carried more threat than warmth. "You really want to do this?" she murmured as she passed. "I didn't start this," I said quietly. The bailiff called the session to order, and we took our places. The judge, a middle-aged woman with silver hair and a calm voice, began by reviewing the filings. Melissa's attorney, a young man with restless hands, read a statement claiming I'd intentionally humiliated his client by calling law enforcement over a misunderstanding. David responded by outlining the trespass report, the police records, and the restraining order already in place. Each word felt like another stone laid into a wall, solid, undeniable. I kept my eyes on the judge, not on Melissa. When it was my turn to speak, I stood palms flat on the table. "She entered my home without permission," I said. "She brought 15 people. I asked her to leave multiple times. She refused." My voice stayed even, each sentence like a step forward on steady ground. Melissa interrupted, her composure cracking. "That's not true." "She invited me." Her voice rose, echoing through the small courtroom. The judge raised a hand for silence. "Ms. Collins, you'll have your turn to respond." David leaned close and whispered, "Don't engage. I didn't." When Melissa finally spoke again, her words came faster, sharper accusations about family loyalty, about jealousy, about me acting superior. Her lawyer tried to rein her in, but she was too far gone. I sat still, watching her unravel the same way she had in my living room weeks before. The courtroom fell into that tense kind of quiet that follows truth, revealing itself without force. After reviewing the police documentation, the judge looked up. "Based on the evidence, this case is dismissed," she said clearly. "Furthermore, the existing restraining order remains in full effect. Any further contact by Ms. Collins will be considered a violation." The gavel struck once. The sound rang through the room like a door closing. Melissa froze, her mouth half open, as if she'd been cut off mid-sentence. The silence that followed was brief but heavy. She turned toward me, her voice dropping low. "You'll regret this, Becky," she whispered. "You always regret pushing me." I met her eyes, calm now. "No," I said quietly. "Not this time." When we stepped outside, the air smelled of rain. Mark held the door as David shook my hand. "You did well," he said. "Better than most people could have." He promised to send the final documents for my records and left for his next case. Mark and I walked slowly back toward the car, neither of us speaking until we reached the parking lot. "She'll run out of moves eventually," he said. I know I answered. "And when she does, I hope she finds peace. Just not here." That night, back at the villa, the sky broke open. Rain hit the windows in steady sheets, and thunder rolled low over the water. I sat by the fireplace with a blanket and a book I never really read, listening to the storm's rhythm. Every flash of lightning lit the ocean for an instant, wild and untamed, yet somehow familiar. When the rain softened, I stepped out onto the covered balcony. The air was cool, damp, and clean. Below, the waves struck the rocks, their white foam glowing in the dim light. For the first time since buying the villa, I felt safe inside it. Not because nothing could happen, but because I finally knew I could handle whatever did. A message alert buzzed faintly from my phone. My heart skipped, but it wasn't Melissa. It was Paula. Heard the news from Mark. Proud of you, Beck. Took guts to see it through. I smiled and typed back, "It's finally over." I wanted to believe it, and maybe part of me did. The paperwork, the hearing, the quiet drive home, it all felt final. But standing there in the soft rain, I knew that the real victory wasn't the judge's dismissal. It was something quieter, deeper, the moment I realized I no longer needed Melissa's approval, her apology, or even her understanding. I went back inside, locked the doors, and turned off the lights. The house was dark but warm, the kind of dark that felt like rest instead of fear. As I climbed into bed, the rain faded to a whisper against the glass. Still a thought lingered soft but certain. Some storms don't end when the sky clears. They end when you stop standing in the rain. The morning after the storm, the world outside looked washed clean. The sea glimmered silver beneath a pale sky, and the air carried that crisp scent that only follows heavy rain. I stood on the balcony with a mug of coffee warming my hands, watching the waves rise and fall in slow rhythm. For the first time in months, I wasn't waiting for the next call, the next crisis, or the next twist of manipulation. The silence around me wasn't empty anymore, it was peaceful. Melissa hadn't reached out since the hearing. Officer Reed confirmed the restraining order had been served, and my attorney said she'd likely back off now that the court had dismissed her case. Still, I knew that silence wasn't the same as reconciliation. Some wounds don't heal with apologies, they fade with distance. And for the first time in my life, I was learning to accept that peace doesn't always include everyone you love. I spent the next few weeks rebuilding what she had tried to break, not just the physical calm of my home, but the sense of safety I'd lost long before Melissa ever arrived. I returned to work full-time, finished a design project that had been gathering dust on my computer, and started walking the beach every morning before sunrise. Paula called often, sometimes just to chat about nothing, and Mark stopped by with coffee on Saturdays. Slowly, the villa became what it was always meant to be, a place to breathe, not hide. One evening, as the sun dipped low, I found a small box while unpacking the last of my things. Inside was an old photograph Melissa and me as teenagers, standing in our parents' backyard, both laughing at something out of frame. For a long time I stared at that picture, searching for the version of us that still believed love was simple. I placed it on the bookshelf beside a framed photo of Mom and Dad. Maybe someday I thought the anger would settle enough for forgiveness to find a way in. But it would have to come from truth, not guilt. A few days later, a letter arrived in the mail postmarked from Melissa's city. My stomach knotted as I opened it. Inside was a single page, handwritten in a rushed scrawl. She didn't apologize exactly, but she didn't attack either. She said she was trying to get her life together, that things had gone too far. It wasn't much, but it was something, a step maybe, or at least the start of one. I folded it carefully and placed it in a drawer. Some doors don't need to close forever, they just need to stay locked until you're ready to open them again. As the days turned warmer, I invited a few neighbors over for dinner, a small gathering, nothing fancy. Laughter filled the kitchen, soft music played through the speakers, and the smell of roasted garlic drifted through the house. At one point, I caught myself looking around the table, realizing that for the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for anyone's approval. These people weren't here because they wanted something from me. They were here because they cared. Later that night, after the dishes were cleared and the last of the guests had gone home, I walked back out to the balcony. The moon hung low over the water, bright enough to paint silver across the waves. I thought about how far I'd come from the woman who once believed peace had to be earned through sacrifice to the one who finally understood that peace could simply be chosen. Melissa's words used to echo in my head whenever I was alone. "You'll regret this. You'll be all by yourself." But standing there with the sound of the ocean rising below me, I knew she'd been wrong. Being alone wasn't something to fear, it was where I'd found myself again. I took a deep breath, the salt air cool against my skin. The tide rolled in and out, steady and patient, erasing the footprints left behind on the sand. That's what life does. I suppose it keeps moving, smoothing the edges of what once felt unbearable. If there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's that love without respect isn't love at all. Boundaries aren't walls, they're doors you choose when and how to open. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't forgiving someone else, it's forgiving yourself for letting them hurt you for so long. I finished the last sip of coffee, feeling the warmth fade from the mug as the stars began to brighten overhead. The villa. My sanctuary stood quiet behind me. No voices demanding, no footsteps echoing through the hallways, just the calm hum of a life finally reclaimed. Before I turned in for the night, I whispered a simple promise into the sea breeze, not for Melissa, not even for my parents, but for myself. I would never trade peace for approval again. And maybe that's what real freedom sounds like, not the absence of noise, but the sound of your own voice, finally steady in the quiet. If you've ever had to draw that hard line between love and peace, I'd like to hear how you found your way through it. Leave a comment or share your story. It might help someone else find their strength too. And if this story spoke to you, stay a while. There are more stories here about dignity, boundaries, and learning that silence can be its own kind of justice.